There are non-rational factors at play in any moment of persuasion. And I want to be clear here. This is whether you're being persuaded out of faith or into faith. There are non-rational factors at play. And I want to dwell on this for a moment.
Okay.
We all know this to be true. I'll sometimes ask students, who here served the mission? And most of the hands will raise. And I'll say, do you guys remember the point in the NTC where you were trained on how to engage in rational argumentation in favor of the historicity of the Book of Mormon?
Yeah.
Nobody.
Yeah. Wait. Nobody's, they're like, no. Yeah. You're basically saying, do you remember when they taught you to argue about it? Yeah, they didn't teach you yet. Okay.
They didn't teach that because we're trained not to, actually. Mm-hmm. Because we know that when somebody is persuaded of the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, it is not ever on the rational merits. It's not ever on the strength of the argument, or strength of the evidence. Nor do we want it to be even.
Hi everyone, Nemo here. You just saw BYU-I Professor Dr. Jeffrey Thane discussing how people are converted to the Mormon Church, as well as how people leave it. And to be honest, I think he's pretty much on the money. As I was watching that clip, I thought, yeah, this guy's read Jonathan Haidt. And sure enough,
when we are trying to persuade somebody to give faith a chance, right? What do? We invite them to read the Book of Mormon. We invite them to church. We invite them to pray. What we're doing is, and all three of those things are working on they're working beneath the level of our rationality, right? We are attempting to speak to the elephant rather than the rider, to borrow from Jonathan Haidt's terms. Okay. Yeah.
I've spoken about Haidt on the channel before, but his book, The Righteous Mind, offers what I think is a very good insight into the psychology of beliefs. His model of the elephant and the rider postulates that the prefrontal cortex, the rational and logical part of our brain, is much newer. It is like a rider that sits atop the elephant that is our much older and more emotional amygdala. That's a really rough explanation of the physiology, but the long and short of it is that when it comes to a choice between what the logical rider and the emotional elephant want to do, the elephant is going to win. And when the elephant does win, it's often the job of the rider, our logical brain, to try and explain what has been decided on that gut feeling. As identified by Dr. Jeffrey Thane, it would seem the elephant is predominantly responsible for people's conversion to the church. He cites the idea that missionaries are taught not to argue with logic, but invite people to feel things. Here in Europe, we're seeing a much different type of convert than we did 50 years ago when my grandparents converted to the Mormon Church. Religion already felt right to them. They were already religious, and so the elephant was already on a religious path. The missionaries didn't need to convince the elephant that religion makes sense, they just needed to steer it gently towards Mormonism, which was often done by offering the convert something that they felt was missing in their own religious beliefs of the time. A teaching on the premortal existence, for example, or an actual codified doctrine of how families will be together forever, rather than the assumed Christian narrative that if you're in heaven, you're probably with your family. This is also why I think the unique beliefs of Mormonism were so emphasized then in a way that they aren't now. They were the peanuts to bring the elephant to Mormonism on its already religious path. In Europe now, we see the church is still meeting an emotional need, and missionaries are still speaking to the elephant, not the rider. But with the secularization of Europe, we now see far more converts who are not looking for which religion to practice on an already religious path. I would say it seems most converts now are just looking for a community, and if it happens to be religious, well then the rider can justify those beliefs in the name of giving the elephant what it wants, an emotionally driven desire for belonging and community. The de-emphasizing of Mormonism's differences from other Christian groups is also connected to this secularization that I just touched upon. When the landscape is broadly religious, it's fine for the church to be trying to distinguish itself from others, going even so far as to say of other religions,
they're playing church. They're sincere. They want it to count, but they don't have the authority. They don't have God's permission.
But that clip from Brad Wilcox is now a rare anomaly, as the Mormon Church seeks to now focus less on the differences and instead try to assimilate itself into the mainstream Christian movement. We can also see, as Dr. Thane said, that this elephant and rider model can be applied to journeys out of Mormonism too. It could explain, for example, why many of the comments on my videos are people saying things like, "I had a faith crisis and you helped me feel I wasn't crazy," or "You validated my position," or even "You've put into words what I felt but couldn't express." All of these sorts of comments speak to the fact that the majority of people engaging with my content who see it as justification for leaving the church were already disabused of Mormon orthodoxy. I get very few comments, if any, saying, "This video made me leave. I had no concerns about the church, I was fully orthodox, but the logic of your argument, it completely changed my worldview on a dime." And the elephant and rider model makes a good case as to why this would be. I would argue many times when people leave the Mormon Church, it is because they have discovered information that on a moral level causes them to reconsider their membership in the church. They discover something, or often a number of things, in the teachings and behaviors of the church and its leaders that do not align with their moral framework. The elephant becomes spooked and wants to leave the religious path, and the rider is left to cling on and try and explain what's happened. Therefore, it would follow that in order to prevent people from leaving the church, it's crucial to try and stop the elephant from getting spooked. Institutions like FAIR, as well as other flavors of apologetics that are available, are a masterclass in trying to keep the elephant on course. Someone discovers morally reprehensible things, like something was hidden from them, or a church leader has engaged in behavior that is contrary to the individual's moral framework. And FAIR will say things like the following to try and soothe the elephant. Yes, Joseph Smith married other men's wives and girls as young as 14, but he didn't have sex with them. This seeks to remove the emotionally problematic sexual component of his behavior. Yes, there were multiple First Vision accounts, but we never hid that from you. You just didn't look. This seeks to remove the emotionally charged feeling of deception by the church through a transference of responsibility onto the members for not doing the research. Yes, the church was fined by the SEC, but it was just a disagreement over paperwork. This seeks to remove the emotionally charged feelings associated with the church deliberately creating a system whereby they would hide their wealth, and most importantly, being deceptive about who controlled that dispersed wealth. It tries to make accident of what was clearly intent. FAIR does everything possible to soothe the elephant, because I think they believe what Dr. Thane is postulating, that the elephant determines the direction of travel. And so if you can calm the elephant, then the person is more likely than not to remain in the church, as people more often than not just want to keep the status quo in their lives. And similarly, once people have made the very often painful transition out of the church, they too seek out information that can reinforce or explain the new things their elephant is feeling in order to maintain their newfound status quo. There will be some people watching this video who will never check the sources, even though I offer them, because my content reinforces what their elephant feels. I've been guilty of this too. I hear something or see a quote and think, that's probably what was said, and I would start to build a video around it. In the early days, I had to rewrite or scrap entire videos because the things someone said a general authority said turned out not to be the case, or not worded the way that it was reported. So now I immediately check and verify, but it's something I've had to learn to do. It's also the reason I've always provided my sources, to try and encourage people to look further than just hearing something that supports their position and accepting it. I've always tried my best not to speak to the elephant, but instead speak to the rider, who isn't really in charge, but is trying to make sense of why the elephant chose to turn away from Mormonism. People like Alyssa Grenfell and John Dehlin are far more successful than me, not only because they're just better than me at YouTube, but because they speak to people's emotions through personal stories and experiences. They are better at speaking to the elephant. And so while I present logic and facts that may cause many Orthodox members disquiet, these things often aren't readily accepted unless the emotional elephant is already on board with entertaining the concept that the church is not what it claims to be or was understood to be by Orthodox members. One's elephant must be willing to accept the information and have a sufficient aversion to things like dishonesty in order to want to change direction when confronted by it. I think that latter point could explain what has been observed by others, that it seems to be those who took the church most seriously end up being those who leave. When the elephant has so deeply embraced the moral framework taught within Mormonism, to see the institution and its leaders violate that framework is often sufficient to motivate the member's elephant into changing course. Now, speaking of members, people who are signed up as channel members got to watch this video early, and those that are signed up through DonorBox to give larger monthly donations will soon be able to join a monthly live stream where we discuss the world of Mormonism together. Channel membership is a very low fixed monthly price, and DonorBox is as much or as little as you want to donate. One or both of these is a great way to support me in doing this as my full-time job. I'm very grateful for all the support I've received so far, and I feel it's time to start rewarding those who have backed me financially, whilst not withholding any of my regular content from just anyone who wants to watch. Now let's get back to the psychology. So we now understand the elephant and rider model, and we understand how it can be used to start to explore the ways in which people become converted or deconverted in a religious sense. And please understand, it's far from a comprehensive explanation as to why people leave and join the Mormon Church. There is so much more to be said here about the nuances of conversion and deconversion that fall outside of the elephant and rider model, and perhaps that's a video I could do another time. There is, however, one last thing worth thinking about, which is that the elephant of church members is very often shaped from birth by the church. It's only natural to ask then how it is the behaviour of the church and its leaders could possibly end up upsetting the elephants of members. Well, that's the deep irony of all of this. The moral revulsion many feel at learning that church leaders lied or did things unbecoming of a church leader is based on the very moral framework that the church instilled in its members. These members who feel betrayed often feel so because they were taught to value the very things the church leaders and the broader institution are failing to embody. When children sing, "I'm trying to be like Jesus" from a very young age, and then discover the church and its leaders have seemingly very little interest in acting like Jesus would, then those same children who internalize that message, as they grow up, are just gonna notice. And until the church understands the effect of this and stops trying to rely on special pleading when it gets caught doing something it taught its members not to do, people will continue to leave, because I believe hypocrisy speaks powerfully to a sense of justice and fairness that is almost universal amongst people, and that the church often heightens in its members. At least that's my view. Let me know yours in the comments.